Hello, so yesterday we went over the distance formula and we completed the first half of this note packet for lesson 3. Today we are going to be working on the midpoint formula. You'll notice the vocabulary here is already filled in, so you can copy that down on your note sheet. And this says that the midpoint of a segment is the point that divides the segment into two congruent parts. So that means their measurements are going to be equal to each other. And if we look at this diagram here, you'll notice that we have segment AB, and M is the midpoint of segment AB. And because we know it's the midpoint, that tells us AM is congruent to segment MB. And then that information leads us to know that the measurements AM is equal to MB. So make sure you get that copied down. And then our next vocabulary word is a segment bisector. And a segment bisector is a point, ray, line segment, or plane that bisects a segment at its midpoint or intersects. So that means it's just something that's cutting it in half. And because we know it's a segment bisector, like this image below, we know that AM and MB, those two segments are congruent to each other. So if it bisects, it cuts it in half. Now let's go over some examples really quick. We are going to use a midpoint to calculate the length of a segment. In the skateboard design, VW bisects XY at point T. And it's already marked in the picture. These two little dashes tell us that those two segments are congruent or equal to each other in measurement. The other piece of information they tell us is that XT is 39.9. So because this is 39.9, we can label that. They want us to find XY. And if we look, XY is the full length of the skateboard. And because we know that this section here is 39.9 and it's congruent to TY, we know this is 39.9 as well. So to find the full length of XY, we are going to add those two values together. And we would get our answer of 79.8. When you're working on word problems like this, and if they give you a label in the problem, don't forget to label your answer. So this one is going to be 79.8 centimeters. And if you want to use a calculator to add them together, that's okay as well. All right, our next example. We are given this diagram, and they tell us that point M is the midpoint of VW. And it's already marked in our picture. If it wasn't, we would mark these lines are congruent. They want us to find the length of VM, which is this length here. So right away, we know that VM is equal to 4x minus 1. We need to figure out what x equals in order to solve for VM. And knowing that our midpoint made these two segments congruent to each other, we're going to set them equal. So we'll have 4x minus 1 equals 3x plus 3. And we're going to go ahead and solve. So if you want to pause the video and try to solve for x and then find VW, you can do that. While you were solving, you should have got where you have the x minus 1 equals 3. If you did it the other way, where you added 1 first, that's okay. But in the end, you should get that x is equal to 4. And once you have that, you're going to take it and plug it back into our problem. So we're going to have VM equals 4 times 4 minus 1. And you can plug that into a calculator or solve it, and you will get 15 for our answer. Looking at part B of this problem, we're going to check your work by using the value of x from part A to calculate the length of MW. Now, if we did our work correctly, that means that when we find the length of MW, it should be equal to the length we found for VM. And looking at our picture, MW is 3x plus 3. And we already know that x equals 4, so we're just going to plug that in. 3 times 4 plus 3. And again, you can type that into a calculator or just solve. 3 times 4 is 12. 12 plus 3 is 15. And that is our answer. And we know we did our work correctly because we found that both segments were equal to 15. All right, so make sure you get this copied down, and then we will move on. So next we have the midpoint rule. And the coordinates of the midpoint of a segment are the average, or the mean, of the x coordinates and the y coordinates of the endpoints. And if you remember, the mean, to find the mean or the average of a group of points, you add them all together and then you divide it by the number of values that you've added up. So if we look at this diagram, what we are going to do is you would take the x's and add those together, so x1 plus x2, and then we would divide that by 2. And we would do the same thing for our y values, y1 plus y2, and then divide by 2. And when you do this, you are going to get an answer that is a coordinate point. So whenever you use this midpoint formula, it is going to be a coordinate point. And if people make mistakes on this, it's because they then add their two x and y values together and just get one number instead of a coordinate point that has a separate x and y value. So make sure you're leaving it as a coordinate point. So if we do an example of this, we just have two short examples left. We have the endpoints of segment RS are R at 1, -3, and S, which is at 4, 2. Find the coordinates of the midpoint M. So right away, we have our x values, 1 and 4, and then our y values, -3 and 2. And we are going to plug that into the formula. And remember, we're going to get two different answers. So if we start with the x's, we're going to add those together, 1 plus 4, and then we're going to divide by 2. Then we'll do the same thing for our y's, -3 plus 2, and then divide by 2. You always want to make sure you are combining the top and then dividing when you are doing these problems. So you want to solve the top of the problem and then do your division. And you should leave your answers as fractions. If you change it to a decimal, that's okay as long as the decimal terminates. So for example, if you got a decimal that was 0.33333 repeating, you should leave that as 1/3 because we want the exact value. But if you had a decimal that was, for example, like this one, you could write this as 2.5 and then 0.5. And that would be okay because these ones terminate and you don't need to leave it as fractions then. But it's always safer to say to just leave it as a fraction. All right, go ahead, pause the video, and try this one on your own and see if you can figure it out. And then once you have your answer, just hit play and check your work. Okay, so we have the midpoint of JK is M, which is 2, 1. So remember our midpoint formula, we have our x1 plus our x2 added together, and then we're doing the same thing with our y's and adding them together, dividing by 2. We know that the midpoint is 2, 1. And we know that one endpoint is 1, 4. They want us to find the coordinate point of the other endpoint, K. So let's plug in what we know. We know that we have an x and a y that we can use from here. So I'm going to replace that down in our equation. we would have 1 plus an x2, which we're going to solve for, and then we would have 4 plus a y2, which we're going to solve for. We know that this part of our equation, the midpoint formula, has to be equal to 2. So we're just going to separate it, and we're going to set them equal. We're going to take 1 plus x all over 2, and that is going to be equal to 2. Then we're going to do the same thing for our y. We know that this part of our formula has to equal 1. So we can go ahead and write 4 plus y over 2 equals 1. And again, now we can solve the equation. I find it is easiest for everyone if we get rid of this fraction over here by multiplying both sides by 2. So when you do that, these two simplify to a 1, which we don't need anymore. So we would have 1 plus x equals 4. And then we would just subtract 1 from both sides. Then we're going to solve the next one the same way. We're going to start by multiplying by 2. The 2 simplify with each other on the left side, so we're left with 4 plus y is equal to 2, and then we subtract the 4. And we do get y equals -2. Now, when you are writing your answer for this problem, they asked us in the question to find the coordinates. So coordinates always mean that you're going to write your answer in the form x comma y. Now that we have our x and our y coordinates, we're just going to write that out and 3 comma -2. And that's how you want to write your answer. For full credit, this is what you need on a quiz or a test. So that is all of our notes for today. If you have any questions, let me know tomorrow and we can go over them together as a class. Have a great day.